welcome Principal Solutions Strategy Manager, New Relic, Kevin Downs.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to bring up my guests right now. So you guys, gentlemen, come on up and take a seat, and we'll get to them in a second. As the voice said, my name is Kevin Downs, and I'm a Principal Cloud Strategist with New Relic. I've been around for 20 years. I focus on SaaS and cloud adoption. So what we're going to talk about today is after lift and shift. What does it take to successfully modernize in the cloud? So real quick, when you tweet the great things that I say, or the even greater things that these gentlemen will say, please use this hashtag. Yes, we already know that. So the agenda we're going to cover today is you're in the cloud, it's just the beginning. There are reasons to modernize, and we're going to cover those reasons. What are your options and the risks associated with those options? And we're going to do it with a continuous application modernization journey. We've all heard of the 6 R's of modernization, or 6 R's journey to the cloud. Retain, retire, repurchase, and the other 3. Real quick, and don't be shy, let your competitors know what you've done. Who has done a lift and shift into a cloud? Okay? Fair, good number here. Okay? There was a study done by 451 Research that said, what is your company's strategy for moving? And the good news is, of the 6 R's, the 3 that are left are the modernization strategies, and they account for 75% of what most companies are doing, which is good for us because it means there's a journey ahead of us that we need to take care of to modernize our applications. So here's the study that was done by 451. And you notice an interesting thing here for you eagle-eyed people. Retire is not on that pie chart. I guess they're really not important if we're just going to retire it. So we care about the stuff that's still staying around. Now, a gentleman at Nike said a very interesting, pun-intended quote. Sometimes he just tells his team to just move it. If we just get it into the cloud, we're going to reap some benefits. There are some really good benefits to be had. Those are cost. We want to get out of the data center, so we want to lower our cost by removing that asset. We want to move faster and get there. We want to have infrastructure that we can monitor, better purposed infrastructure, so we know what we're going to utilize. And from a development point of view, we have a dispersed team. And we also have some new cool services that we're going to give them to play with. Well, we had to move some applications to the cloud. We did that. We had to move everything to the cloud. We did that. We're out of the data center. We did that. We basically proved success. Well, is everything as it should be? Even though it says 100%, can we do better? Can I get a yes? That's a quiet yes. Can I get a yes? All right. So I like to talk to Josh and bring him up on stage and say, please introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what you're about.
Sure. Before I begin, I want to, whoa, I've lost my mic.
You got it?
I'd like to know, are there any other Canadians in attendance?
We got one over there.
Great, one.
2.
One. Great. 2. Wow. All right.
And me, don't forget me.
Oh yeah, Javier's Canadian too. I mean, I guess there's nobody left in Canada. That's kind of awkward. My name is Josh Biggley. I'm a senior monitoring engineer at Cardinal Health. I have the distinction and pleasure of being the senior engineer on a team of geographically distributed engineers. I live in Prince Edward Island, Canada. You should all come and visit. It's a wonderful place. Just don't come in the winter. I've got team members that are in Columbus, Ohio, or just outside of Columbus, outside of Chicago, Illinois, in Texas, California. I've got teammates that are in our Manila office. We are responsible for designing, deploying, supporting, and integrating a wide variety of enterprise monitoring tools. My team is responsible for defining what the patterns will look like. We don't always do the execution, but we do build these patterns that we hand to teams and say, here are some of the preferred practices for our enterprise. Using those patterns, we hope that teams will then build on them, start to execute. The previous session, of course, was about DevOps and SRE. We'd love our teams to embrace that using our tools.
have a question for you, Josh. At Cardinal Health, what is your philosophy for moving to the cloud? Is it lift and shift, replatform, re-architecture, refactor? What is your main goal?
So Kevin, I think that the best way to figure out who Cardinal Health is and what our strategy for going to the cloud is to look at Cardinal Health as a company. Cardinal Health has this philosophy of being essential to care. When you think about what does Cardinal Health do, we deliver medical supplies and solutions to 85% of the hospitals in the United States, where we deliver pharmaceuticals to over 26,000 pharmacies. We deliver products to over 3 million home healthcare users. That idea of being essential to care as a global company filters down to us. So we ask ourselves, what is it that we should do? In some cases, and I love the hands that went up that said, yes, we did lift and shift. In some cases, we're just going to lift and shift. But in a lot of cases, our journey to the cloud was intended to enable our application and platform teams to be more nimble, to be more agile. It was really about building velocity and allowing that velocity to develop over time. I mean, when you first move to the cloud, you may not have all of the tools that you need from day one. But as cloud platforms continue to develop, as they continue to expand, you're going to find replatforming, refactoring, rehosting are all options.
Thank you very much, Josh. Next up, I have an outstanding guest customer. Javier, can you take the stage and let us know who you are and what you do?
My name is Javier Miguez. I work with Fleet Complete. And part of our journey into the cloud was, we went through a whole period of growth. I've been with the company for 7 years now. And our fast growth meant that we went through a whole bunch of transitions. We went from your traditional pizza boxes to your UCS systems, blades, all these kinds of software, and then we continued to expand at a very rapid rate. We went through a series of M&As as well, and part of that meant that we were fractured, right? We had a whole bunch of different data centers all over the world. We were entering new markets, and part of this, through M&As, left us with several different technologies, different people working with different monitoring tools. We had the Nagios, we had the Prometheus, we have New Relic. We have a whole bunch of different tools that we wanted to now consolidate. All these different people that are now working all over the world, we wanted them all to use the same alerting systems, consolidate all those different tools and platforms. And obviously New Relic has helped us do a lot of that. That's basically where we started, where I grew over the 7 years. Has been an amazing journey, and I'm glad to be here.
So Javier, same question to you. What is at Fleet Health, at Fleet Complete, what is your philosophy for moving to the cloud? Lift and shift or some of the others? Where do you guys stand?
So our real philosophy is we want to shift into the cloud to have that one common platform first, and then consolidate what we're going to do. For example, hybrid was one of the approaches that we did take initially. We wanted to transition in a safe way over into the cloud. So we want to make sure that we use as much as we can of our existing infrastructure and then move as we can. Some of the reasons for going into the cloud at first became, you have your regular hardware cycle of 3 to 5 years, and now it's time, to be thinking about that for the next budget for the next year. Is that the route we want to take? And some of those answers were, maybe this is the time. Now is the time. We've embarked down cloud infrastructure for our global deployments. Now it's time that we move everything into the cloud and consolidate.
So what we've talked about, what we've heard so far is lift and shift is not bad. There are benefits, but what's next? During your journey to get there, you probably had some improvements. You probably had some ideas or 100 ideas. You also wanted to do some cost savings. It's great to be there, but now you're receiving the bills and you want to see if you can optimize. Let's take, for example, a customer of ours, Morningstar. About 2 years ago, they went through the same thing. They did a major lift and shift, and they took one application, and they lifted and shifted to EC2, MS SQL, and DynamoDB. They re-architected it into an S3 data lake and Lambda. And they received, on just one application, a 97% cost savings. So this is important, and this was 2 years ago. Imagine what you can do today, especially with the serverless for Lambda. So why modernize? I don't really want to go too much into why modernize. It's more along the lines of You know you need to modernize, but the question is what and how? Which applications are the most important or going to give the best bang for your buck for your company? These how and what are going to be understanding your modernization options. We've already covered them. We're going to go into them a little bit more. And you need a deep insight into your applications. So we've hit the 6 R's. We've talked about these a little bit, but I'm going to focus on rehost and, more importantly, replatform and refactoring. And as you go up this list, there are going to be more and more risk involved. But we need to mitigate that risk. So we don't have to worry about that as long as we mitigate it. Those risks are going to include things like not taking in dependencies of the application, whether it's the individual components or the application as a whole. Not focusing on the customer experience. Very key. Maybe you get some unexpected outcomes that you weren't looking for. These are the risks that we need to mitigate. We're going to do that with a continuous application modernization journey. 5 steps to this. We're going to set some goals. We heard it earlier in the DevOps journey. We talk about it all the time. We need to sit down and establish goals. We need an understanding of what our current environment is, whether it's applications or baselines. We need to know what those are. We need to know what approach, and it's not just a single approach for one application. You might break that application apart and figure out which best approach for the individual components. And observability, you've heard it throughout the day, and it stands to note that you're going to use observability throughout the whole journey, before, during, and after. And then you're going to repeat, because just because you moved it into the cloud doesn't mean you're done. Just because you replatform it doesn't mean you can make it better the next time. I want to take a side note, use a little bit of Tori's talk we had earlier, and talk about how modernization and DevOps are kind of interchanged. They feed off each other. And as an aside, I want to ask Javier this time, how has modernization of your infrastructure accelerated your delivery cycles?
So it definitely made a huge impact. Back when I started, it was your typical 6-month release cycle. It was thrown over the fence, and you go deploy it from an ops perspective. And part of that culture change that I was a part of was bringing that deployment, the CI/CD part of the SDLC, and then you bring it in shift left mentality, basically. And we went from 6 months over to 1 month, and then after bringing in New Relic and really getting people involved, making model teams out of it, we went down to a weekly cycle. And we're still at a weekly cycle today. The occasional hiccup will happen, it's there, but now there's a lot of learning behind it. You have your metrics to back it up. You have that data to now show and say, you know what, this is why we didn't make a release this week. And everybody's accountable, everybody can plainly see what's there, and everybody's involved. There's no, part of that, throwing it over the fence mentality was, I used to be part of a tier 3 team that was doing those deployments. We were actually fixing the bugs so that development wouldn't be impacted by the feature releases, right? So that definitely helped tremendously and increased our not only our speed, but our quality.
Josh, same question for you. How has DevOps and your modernization journey impacted each other?
So very similar to what Javier was talking about, we shifted to smaller teams. Teams that were more empowered to make decisions and to really focus on what it is that their customers needed to deliver. I mean, when you start to give teams access to data, when you start to give them access to the information that they need to make informed decisions, they have not only the technical context from the tools, from the observability that you give them, but they also have context from their customers. I mean, oftentimes as an enterprise monitoring team, we would build these patterns and we would roll them out because we really felt that they were best practices, good practices maybe. But when we take those patterns and we give them to a team and say, look, this is a recipe for you. You can either use these patterns or you can take these patterns and completely deconstruct them. I mean, that is a very powerful thing. So we have adopted this idea of DevOps and SRE. And in fact, on my team, we have rebranded SRE. I hope Google doesn't mind. If they do, I'm sorry. We call it service reliability engineering. And I mean, it's really maybe splitting hairs, but we want this idea, and this goes back to the previous talk, of having our teams focusing on services. What is it that we deliver? And for my team, we deliver an enterprise monitoring service. So we ask ourselves, what are the SLAs that we need to have with our customers internally, with the app and platform teams? What are the SLOs, and how are we going to measure our compliance with those SLOs? Getting to SRE, whether it's site reliability or service reliability, is a journey. We're still on that journey, and I expect that we will always be on that journey. It's part of that continuous cycle.
Thank you, gentlemen. So when we go to the first step, we talk about goals. We know we need to sit down and have some hard discussions. And as I heard Boris mention earlier, you need to do it with all the teams that have a stake in the game. So there's some examples of some goals you can set up both from an IT and a business point of view. And I want to ask our gentleman again, Josh, during your journey, how did your focus change, and how does Cardinal Health's modernization impact that focus?
I think the best way to describe how our focus changed, and specifically how the focus of my team changed, is to tell a story about how New Relic came to be at Cardinal Health. My team originally was an infrastructure-focused team. We were responsible for doing compute and storage and network monitoring. We did application monitoring, but it was not APM. About 3 years ago, when we started this journey to the cloud, we were tasked with finding a tool that could do infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then at the very tail end, we were told we also need to include APM monitoring. Through that engagement, of course, we talked with New Relic along with other companies, and our account executive, John Pasco, said during one rather heated discussion, he said, "Josh, now listen, you're just doing monitoring wrong." And I thought, who is this guy to tell me that I'm doing monitoring wrong? And here's what he meant to say. He meant to say, Josh, you need to put your customer first. You need to stop worrying about your compute, your storage. I mean, you still need to worry about your network because cloud is network. But I needed to consider, and I needed to provide platforms and tools for my teams to consider how their customer was interacting with the service that we were delivering. I mean, we've all got these applications that are customer facing. If my servers are humming along quite happily in the background, but my customers are getting 404 errors on the front end, and I can't see them, who cares how my servers are doing? So I'm appreciative to John for helping me shift my focus. We're now working to better monitor what our clients, our customers are experiencing from digital experience monitoring using synthetics and other tools.
It's nice to know our account executives aren't shy about telling you what you need to do and not need to do.
Yeah, not at all.
So Javier, when we talk about these KPIs and things we want to sit down and establish for goals, one of your KPIs was uptime, and it's essential to you. Can you expand on this goal and tell me how modernization has helped you focus on it?
Well, see, part of the easy part of modernization is when you are building things that are new. So when you're building your new API, your new set of services, they're very easy now to embark on that team as a DevOps culture and say, we're going to embrace new principles. But part of our struggle is that we have a lot of legacy applications that are sitting around. And we don't just want them to sit around, we also want to provide improvements to those services. So one of our goals as part of rolling out New Relic is, even though we don't have APM embedded into the application, a lot of the various agents can just monitor IIS, for example, get into the .NET side of things. And we noticed that we started seeing things that weren't in the legacy APM. It brought things out, now we're able to trace an error all the way down to the database call, whereas maybe before we were able to get a stack trace up until the error occurred, but we couldn't dig deep. And Uptime really, it actually helped improve that tremendously. Our goal was to make sure that overall, including our legacy applications, was 99.9. It's a regular, reasonable goal for legacy apps. But now that we're able to see everything, we gave ourselves a new goal. We wanted to reach 99.99 like our modern applications do. And we've been happily able to reach 99.98. So we're almost there, and I'm hoping that with the next few stretches, we can actually get there.
Thank you, gentlemen. So when we talk about these goals and establishing these goals, once you put them down on paper, and they could be broad, you need to be more specific and start coming up with the KPIs that you need to monitor for those specific goals. Here's an example of a KPI one-pager for an airline. And it goes into corporate KPIs, mobile, web, trends, things that you need to care about for each person who has a stake in this game and this application. So I know these gentlemen sat down and created goals and then monitored those goals with the KPIs behind them. Step 2, understanding. How are resources being used? So you need to have an application infrastructure understanding. How are your applications performing? Are they performing the way you expect them? So we need to know about the application quality. And how are things impacting the business? Is this application performing well enough that we're getting positive revenue? These are things we need to know, and we're going to use through observability with an understanding. Step 3, which approach? Now, we already talked about a few of these, and we already touched on rehosting, so I really want to focus on replatforming and refactoring. Common to all of these is you need to have an understanding of the risk and how to minimize them. We covered some of those risk factors. You need to use an informed approach, meaning you need data to make decisions. Compatibility analysis. I didn't mention this before, but you need to know what you have and if it's compatible with what your goals are. So you need to make sure you're analyzing exactly where you plan on going to make sure that it's going to be there for you. You need a deep understanding of the components of your application. As I mentioned earlier, you may move an application to a replatforming, the whole thing, or you may break it apart and just take some parts of it and move it along the line. These are very important to know. You're going to use data, data, and data before, during, and after, all the way through. It's going to be a lot of information that you need to make decisions on, so we need to give it to you. So I've come up with just a couple reasons for replatforming. We know we have reasons we want to move. These are some top ones. Scalability. We want to improve scalability to accommodate our growing business. We want reliability and performance. These are things that the cloud is going to offer us. And we want to improve costs. One of the reasons we move to the cloud is to lower our costs. Let's go forward with that and start achieving those. Now, when you go through this journey, you're going to get a lot of information in the form informed platforming is what I'm calling it, about end user experience, the application performance, dependencies, all the parts and pieces of your application that you're replatforming, you're going to get a lot of information about it. When you look at an application, you're not going to say, I need to move this. I need to break this piece off. Your coders, your developers may know that, but not everyone. If we look at the components of your application and we use something like this, a service tree, that's going to give you a very good visibility into all parts and pieces of your application, you'll start to see where the important pieces are and which piece you can break off and replatform. So let's move over into refactoring. There's different reasons to refactor than there are for replatforming or rehosting. Some of these reasons are revenue. Well, now you want to improve the app so much that it actually improves the bottom line of the company. There are new features out there, and you want to refactor to get those new features in. And again, as we talked earlier, Josh mentioned and Javier's talked about, customer focus is very key. One of the reasons you're going to refactor is to maintain that customer focus and improve, get those new features in there. Some information you're going to receive when you go through a refactoring. You're going to find out which parts and pieces of your code have the most changes. You need to focus on those. Which ones have the most issues? Improve those. Infrastructure. You need to know where your infrastructure parameters are. You're going to monitor those with KPIs so that you can make sure that as you refactor, you're either using the proper resources or you're going to something like serverless. You need to know what's working, what's slow, and what's not working. There are different types of refactoring. Classic one is just improving code. We talked about that in the last slide. But maybe a deployment model is what you need to do. Maybe you want to go to a beanstalk deployment model. There's also technology refactoring. So when you look at that service map and you see your database, maybe you need to go from an MS SQL to an Aurora. So you're going to technology refactor. Those are things you need to take into account as well. One of the things you're going to do when you look at things to refactor are find the bottleneck. What's the slowest point across my journey? Distributed tracing gives great visibility into the slow parts, the bottleneck of your application. All right, Step 4, observability. Again, we heard about it all today. You're going to use data before, during, and after. But I'd like to ask Josh a question. Cardinal Health experienced a very interesting 11th hour hiccup. Can you tell us about how New Relic was able to support you during that issue?
Yeah, so I don't know if it was exactly 11th hour, but it was definitely a change in strategy. I said earlier that we began our shift to the cloud about 3 years ago, and we had initially started to move some of our workloads into AWS. About 2 years ago, 18 months ago, we decided that we were going to move into GCP. We actually have the honor, and maybe it's a dubious honor, of having the single largest instance at GCP. I don't remember the statistics, but it has to do with SAP. And if you run SAP, you're all nodding your heads going, oh, we understand, Josh, that makes sense. The idea now, of course, is that Cardinal is a multi-cloud consumer. We've got workloads in GCP, AWS, and Azure. Having a tool that made viewing the data between those different clouds agnostic was important to us. I mean, not every tool can do that. If you're using some of the vendor-specific tools, they tend to focus on the thing that they do well. For us, New Relic let application and platform teams see how their various components were working and to pick the components that worked well for them. We also have data centers. I mean, we got rid of one data center. We still have another data center, although we've reduced the size of that. We have some small co-location facilities. For us, it's really about this agnostic view, this agnostic observability that allows teams to see their workloads no matter where they're running.
Excellent. Javier, how does New Relic keep everyone at Fleet Complete on the same page and aware of what's going on?
So I'm going to echo some of those same comments. You know, we have on-premise environments, we have cloud environments, and we want to be able to have that single pane of glass across all data centers. And sometimes I always joke because single pane of glass can be misleading. You don't want it to be frosted, you don't want it to be, you know, smudged. You really want it to tell you exactly how it is in a clear fashion. And I think by having everything in one place, and I'm very excited about everything that was announced this morning, by the way. You know, logs is something that we've been trying to put into the same platform for a long time, and really excited to try that out. I think that'll be a final step at least in our journey to really put things together. You know, as part of our transition over from your monolithic application, breaking it apart into your microservices, you realize that because you had this monolithic application, your microservices end up calling that legacy app at some point or another. But nobody can remember when or how. And as part of having that New Relic pipeline in the mix and being able to see everything, all the dependencies that these services are touching, I think that's really the game changer for developers to now know which other teams they need to interact with. You know, as part of that whole DevOps mentality change where, you know, the SREs used to manage everything and not engage the developers directly when there was a fire, that whole culture change is really starting to take effect. And you know, now we're getting developers involved when there really are issues. Well, now they need to understand and have the ability to see who else do I need to bring into this, because it's not an issue that just impacts me. It can impact various pieces of the application and the application dependencies.
Excellent, thank you, gentlemen. So when we talk about observability before, during, and after this journey, before is going to give you that full understanding and give you the informed information about planning. During, you're going to demonstrate and prove success along the way with various milestones as you improve your journey. And then finally, after, you want to optimize. Whether you've moved into rehosting, refactoring, or replatforming, one of the last steps is going to be optimizing what you just did. So I know I gave an example earlier of a 97% cost savings. Here's another example of a New Relic customer, Trainline, who was projected to be significantly over their AWS budget. They didn't use New Relic to refactor, replatform, but they used it to optimize what they'd already done. So by the end, they ended up coming in 1% under their year budget. So very good cost savings that you can use. Whether you're refactoring for performance, replatforming for need, there's savings to be had at the end of this journey. So step 5, rinse and we know. It's more like a reminder that this is a continuous journey. You're going to rehost, and you've done that. There's nothing wrong with that. As we heard earlier, just move it. You have some benefits. But as you go through these things, and even if you have 100% availability, 100% performance, everything you want, there are steps you can take to improve what you have. Whether you're looking to go with cost savings or focusing on customer experience, these are things you need to focus on. So don't let the end signify that you're done. Look to see where you can go again. So before I wrap up and go through a little bit of a summary, I want to give the last word to Josh and Javier. Do you have any final thoughts? And let's start with Javier this time. Javier, any final thoughts on modernization?
Absolutely. As part of the lift and shift, really what happens after is you start to really know all the little nuances of your application. You find out that you had this data center, and all of a sudden you wanted to use all the resources, so you over provision server services and all these other things. And as part of the modernization strategy, you're looking at all the serverless, the native cloud opportunities out there, and really capturing the data that when I think it was talked about earlier, but really a server's up today, but it's gone tomorrow when you're talking about auto scaling or the Kubernetes world that we're moving into. And you need to be able to have that resiliency, the capabilities of looking at what happened yesterday. Maybe a benign error happened yesterday that will never happen again today. It didn't trigger an alert, but you need to be able to go back to that and still improve your application, because that will happen again if you don't address it. And those are some of the different areas that we're looking at. But really the modernization is key to cost reduction for the business. Is also one of them. But I think from a developer standpoint of view, having that visibility into your applications and the way that they interact, and again, not just stopping because your task is done, really defining what the definition of done means for a story even, right? We want to be able to say, hey, your definition of done is we do have reliability in place. We do have, self-healing, for example. That's the next topic we're going to tackle. And it's always out there. There's always something else to do, and you should always challenge yourself to do more.
Josh, final thoughts on yourself on Cardinal Health and modernization?
So I'm a data geek. The reason I got into enterprise monitoring is because that is where all the data is. I love data. I said that I'm a data storyteller. I would say democratization of access to data. When you have this single platform where you can do things like put logs in context, where you can pull in your metrics about your Kubernetes clusters, when you can pull in APM and infrastructure metrics, when you can start to give to teams the tools that they need to ask the questions of the data that you had no idea that you should have been asking in the first place. To me, that's democratization of data, and that's where I want to head.
Thank you, gentlemen. So in summary, we understand that the cloud is just the beginning. We moved there. There were some great benefits that we reaped. There is nothing wrong with lifting and shifting to the cloud. There are reasons to do it. But there are also reasons to modernize. Whether it's a customer focused or cost, there are reasons to do it. There are a couple options, and I want to take away one thing. Don't be shy to break apart your application and modernize them separately. You get a lot of visibility and a lot of benefits for taking what you need only when you need it and modernizing it. There are some risks. Overcome those risks and move forward. And you're going to do it with a continuous application modernization. 5 steps, the last one is repeat, so do them over and over again. On behalf of myself, Kevin Downs, Josh, and Javier, thank you, gentlemen, very much for your patience. Thank you very much, everyone.